And is someone on the 5-minute bell?
I can do that too.
Okay. All right, this is, I wrote for the Olympian newspaper, and I'll submit it to the Daily World also. And this is an article called The Way of No Home. And the subhead is, "In a palace or under a bridge, we are still homeless." And the byline about word count. Okay. Where to get my headshot. All right. In Aberdeen, Washington, the town I call home, I often walk the alleys, which are wide and filled with artwork and graffiti. One of the graffito says, quote, "To all of those I have not met, let me light my cigarette," end quote. The first line is in iambic pentameter. The second is in trochaic. As the oldest child in a huge, chaotic Irish Catholic family, how do I know this? Or that the singular of graffiti is graffito? Because I was taught these things by a homeless Catholic monk. These brothers were poor as individuals, but not exactly poor as a group. The congregation owned a winery and a champagne cellar in the Napa Valley and a brandy distillery in the foothills of Central California. But the profits helped fund many high schools, a liberal arts college, a tutoring center in Oakland, an adult education and resettlement center in Tijuana, an elementary school in San Francisco's Tenderloin district, and, not inappropriately, a quietly professional residence for clerical alcoholics. The man who taught me, Brother James, was one of these clerical alcoholics. He died this year, and I attended his funeral, at which the eulogist proudly announced that years ago James had realized he was an alcoholic, sought treatment, and changed his whole life. It was he who taught me the difference between the I am and the trochee, or the arcane fact that graffito is the singular of graffiti. In sobriety, he went back to university, became a licensed clinical psychologist, and over the years until his death, helped many fellow religious, students, parishioners, and just plain crazy people to find their way back to a life of balance and sanity. These days, I walk the alleys of Aberdeen in the robes of a Buddhist monk. And in our tradition, the word for monk means home leaver. The idea here is that, like the historical Buddha, we leave the palace of parental care and go over the walls into the world of sickness, old age, and death. In the Christian tradition, St. Francis of Assisi took off his bright brocades and dropped them on the cobbles. He stood there, naked in the town square, embarrassing everyone but himself. So off he went to reenact the life of Christ. In the Western tradition, the spiritual ideal of home leaving can be found in the words of an aria toward the end of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion. Quote, "I will intune Jesus into myself, so that in myself he may forever take his sweet rest." The motto of that order of brothers that Brother James was in is "Live Jesus in our hearts." And this is one of the methods of Christian spirituality, to imitate Christ as best we can. The other day I met a friend in an Aberdeen alley. He smiled to see me, ran up and placed a small polished river rock in my hand. Quote, "It's sacred," end quote. It's sacred, he told me, bleary-eyed, perhaps forgetting that he'd run this game on me before. He chanted a blessing that sounded pretty sacred, then made a bow to me. How much does the blessing cost? I asked, matter-of-factly. Whatever you've got, he says, mock, humble. I reached in my pocket and gave him a fist of ones. I've also seen him during his sober times, which are when he's in jail or prison or treatment. Quote, I'm an alcoholic, so I have to drink, end quote, he told me once, with all the logic of his Jesuit education. Quote, sometimes when I get out, I last for a few days or weeks at my sister's double wide. She looks after me and I do a lot of chores for her. But then the craziness always comes back, and I drink, and then I feel at home again. He smiles, he bows, he heads towards Safeway. So that's the piece. The theme there is home and home leaving, and home is where the booze is, or whatever. So any thoughts on that? You have any reactions? Huh?
Is that for the perspectives column, the interfaith workshop?
Yeah. Yeah, and in Aberdeen it's called Faces of Faith.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Any questions? Remind you of anything?
I was a little confused.
Yeah. It jumps around a bit.
Yes. The title led me down one path and I ended up somewhere else. So I'm not sure if that's part of the point, since many times that's what we do when we're homeless. We start somewhere, and if we don't know where we're going, we end up somewhere else.
Yeah. Actually, I have some other quotes that make that point. That the point of being homeless is maybe not to find a home, but to be homeless. And where I really was trying to start was, how do you have a spiritual life? If you're homeless in reality, or if you're homeless in this metaphorical sense of being a renunciate. So I need to do a better job of connecting all that, I think.
That would, what you just said would be perfect.
Okay. What did I just say?
That there's an alliteration. There's both a spiritual life, actually being homeless, and then there's the homelessness of spiritual life.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I think a lot of the homeless mentally ill that we run into, they do have a spiritual life, and they're looking for something. Anything else?
The translation of homeless was from what?
Home leaver? You mean?
Yeah, what was that translated from?
Well, it's in the original Pali in Sanskrit.
The bhikkhu?
Well, in the Vedic tradition, there's a huge number of words for various kinds of renunciates. You have siddhis, you have rishis, and on and on. Each one has a little different flavor. But yes, bhikkhu, I'll have to look it up, I'm not sure, I don't remember.
Monk is the same way in English, as you have the Cenobite, the Anchorites, and so forth. Monk itself in the original meant alone. And
Yeah. And that, actually, it's very interesting. That tradition goes from the Middle East into around Marseille, and then it goes around to Ireland. And that's one reason why the Irish Catholic Church was so different. It was based on monasteries rather than bishops and dioceses.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Everyone congregated around monasteries. Yeah, the great lonely one is what some of the hermits were described as originally. But there's all through these traditions, there's that idea of you've got to leave home. Okay, let's do our dedications.